Hello everyone and welcome to the 6th video in the SDL 2.0 tutorial series. So in this video I want to show you how you can clip a single sprite from a sprite sheet. Right now our texture class takes one sprite and it outputs it onto the screen. So in our GameManager.cpp we don't need text2 anymore, so we can go ahead and remove this. And we have our mtext that's loading our sprite sheet. So if we run this, all we get is a single texture that's being output onto the screen. We can't move it and we can't do anything with it. So how can we make it so that we can move this texture around? First thing we're going to do is to go to our texture.h and add a few new variables. First, we will add a variable for the render rectangle. So SDL underscore rect, and we'll call this one render rect. And this will be our render rectangle. So if we go to our CPP, we can go ahead and add the render rectangle stuff in there. So we can say mRenderRect.w. So the width of the render rect is going to be equal to our mWidth, and the height will be equal to our mHeight. Next up, we need to use the values that we have for our game entity. As you remember, we inherited from game entity, which contains an X and Y position. So for that, over here, we can say vector2 position is going to be equal to our position in the world. And this, because of game entity, will give us our world position. And we'll say mRenderRect.x is going to be equal to an int cast of position.x minus mWidth times 0.5, and mRenderRect.y is going to be equal to int cast of position.y minus mHeight times 0.5 f. And all this does is that it tells it where we want to render, and our render rect will be our position minus .x minus half the width, and our position.y minus half the height, so that our texture is centered. So our position will be the center of our texture. Okay, so next up, we can add something new to our draw texture and graphics. So if we go to our graphics.h, now our SDL texture needs to take a new variable, which will be an SDL underscore rect pointer, and we'll call this one rend. And by default is going to be equal to null. So if we take that now, and in graphics.cpp, we go to draw texture, we can add it here. So SDL underscore rect pointer rend, and our render texture will be used in here instead of one of these variables. As you can see, there's a source rect and a destination rect all the way to the end, and our rend will go right here. So we'll pass it rend, just rend, because it's already a pointer. Now if we go back to our texture, we can pass our render rectangle. Of course, this will be a reference to render rectangle, and this should be it for changing the position of our texture. If we try to run it now, there we go. As you can see, our texture is, because SDL starts from the top left, so our texture is centered right here. If we go back, and you'll notice that the texture is no longer stretched either, because our window is 800 by 600, and that's right here. So our window is 800 by 600. Our texture was much smaller than that. Before, it used to stretch the texture. But now that we have it loaded in texture.cpp, we have our render rectangle set to our mWidth and mHeight. Now it's constrained to our actual texture width and height. So if we do something now in Game Manager, for example, if we say mtext position is going to be equal to a vector2 of graphics screen width times 0.5 f, as well as graphics screen height times 0.5 f. So we are changing the position of our texture now, and it should change it in the game. So if we go back here, as you can see, now it's centered and it's the right size. So far we have it so that we can move our texture around. Now we need to be able to clip a single image from that texture. And for that, we will go back to our texture.h. In here, we will add another rectangle, which will be our clip rectangle. But first, we will also need a boolean called mClipped, which will tell us whether our texture is clipped or not. And an SDL_rect, which will be mClipRect. Now in our texture, if we call this constructor, then we don't have a clip texture because we're just passing it a file name, so we're using the entire texture. So in here, we can say that our clip texture, our mClipped, is equal to false. We need to also create a constructor for a clip texture. So texture, it will take a file name as well, so string file name, as well as an int x for the position of where that clipped texture is on the x, as well as the y, so int x and int y. And then we'll give it an int width and an int height for that texture. Now we can go ahead and implement this new constructor. So if we go to texture.cpp, we'll go down to here and say texture std string file name, and then int x, int y, int w, and int h. We'll do the exact same thing at the beginning. So our mGraphics is going to be equal to graphics instance. Our mText will be the same, so it's going to be equal to the asset manager instance get texture, which will take the file name. But now, instead of doing an SDL query for the texture to get the width and the height, we are already passing these two in here. So first we'll say that our clipped is true, because now we're using clip texture. Our mWidth is going to be equal to w, and mHeight is going to be equal to h. Now we'll do the same for our renderRect. So renderRect dot width is going to be equal to our mWidth. Our renderRect dot h is going to be equal to mHeight. Now the only thing left is to give values to our cliprect. Our cliprect will be, so mCliprect dot x is going to be equal to our x. mCliprect dot height is our y, is going to be equal to our y. Then mCliprect dot width is going to be equal to our mWidth, and mCliprect dot height is going to be equal to our mHeight. And this should be it for our new constructor. Now we need to use our cliprect to clip our image and render it onto the screen. For that, we will need to update our graphics.h once more. Now we're already getting the render rectangle. We will also need to add the clip rectangle. So SDL_rect pointer, and we'll call this one clip, which will start off being null as by default. And in graphics.cpp, we'll go down and add it here as well. So SDL_rect pointer clip, and instead of this null, we will pass it clip. So this should be it for graphics.cpp. now we can go back to texture.cpp and do our rendering. So we can use the ternary operator here and say that if the image is clipped, we want to pass it our mClipped rectangle. So this will be equal to mClipped rect. Otherwise, if it's not clipped, then just pass in null, because there's no point in doing any clipping calculations if we want the entire texture to be passed in. So we'll just pass in null otherwise. And that should be it for our setup. We need to now create a clipped texture. For that, we will change our sprite sheet to be a clipped texture instead. So we'll call the other constructor instead. So we need to know where our one of our objects is starting on the sprite sheet. So if we go to our assets and our sprite sheet, so let's go to open with, let's try Photoshop. Okay, there we go. So now let's go ahead and see where this is starting. So if we go to with the selection tool, let's say we want this ship right here. So it's starting somewhere around 180 and 54, let's say, or 182 and around 54. So let's say this is where it's starting. We can go back to our program and say that we want it to start at 182 and 54. And how big it is, we can say that I think these images are about 24 by 24. Yeah, it's around there. So let's say, or 22 by 22. So let's give it the width and height of 22 by 22. There we go. And now we can go ahead and run this project. And as you can see, there we go. Our ship is clipped. Of course, you can edit the values to match exactly what you need. So let's say, let's make it 20 by 20 instead. And try to run it. And there we go. So now we have our ship. It's being rendered and it's clipped from the sprite sheet. If we, instead of using the graphics screen width and height, we want to change the position to something else. Let's say 100 and 200. And there it is over here. So this should be it for clipping a texture from a sprite sheet, and we'll be using that to clip each entity separately, so enemies, flare, and so on. I hope this video helped. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback, please leave them below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.